Thank you, Amy. It was a wonderful session so far. And hello, everyone. I think, as Amy was talking about, we are almost at the final stages of the conference, but trust me, we have the best for the last, right? So it's going to be a very exciting panel today. And I know that most of us have celebrated the forgettable anniversary of the pandemic. I think this has by far been one of the pivotal events of all our professional lives. And as you could, as you heard many of our speakers talk today on how they have to transform their workplace, how they have to reimagine their, employee engagements or employee experiences, how they manage their, not only employees, but their business. Everything is changed today. But today, in this panel, we are primarily going to focus on employee engagement. I know earlier in a part of the conference, both Jason and Rohan talked a little bit about the employee experience, especially when employees are all either remote or we are coming towards some kind of a hybrid workplace. And we will ask the panelists what they think. Is it all going to be remote? Are we going to be back to the pre-pandemic normal, or are we going to have some kind of a hybrid in between there? So we'll start with there. But before that, I just want to say that we are so honored to have all these panelists here. I mean, this is probably the most diverse set of panelists that we can get for this topic. We have practitioners, we have managers we have the people who are leaders of this change management. So with that, actually, Richa, let me start with you. I mean, how did 2020 go, and how is 2021 coming along for you?
Exactly. Well, thank you, Vamsee and Zeno, first of all, for the opportunity, for giving us a platform to make our voices be heard. 2020, if you look at it in the rear view mirror, what I saw, Vamsee, personally, was misery and suffering at scale. We can all pause and just look at the kind of enormity of what has happened, 2.5 plus million deaths, right, globally so far. So it has been really tough. But on the positive side, we also have seen a lot of communities at scale, like cultures and countries and communities coming together to solve for what is not a local problem, right? It's a global problem needing a global solution. We also saw innovation at scale. So a lot of kind of creative ways of doing the work, the new habits, the digitization of the companies got accelerated by about 5 years. So that's, when I look at 2020 in the rear view mirror, that's what I see.
Excellent. So let's go to Vibha, but on a different topic, similar topic, but different question. What did you see? I mean, you guys are as global as anyone in this room are, right? So are there any nuances that you saw regionally or globally, Vibha?
Good question, Vamsee. And first of all, thanks for the question and thanks for having me here. In terms of the nuances, and you're right, we have various offices around the globe, but the priorities more or less were similar, right? So first priority for every one of us across the globe in every office was employee safety and well-being, giving a sense of to our employees of support and helping them adjust to the new normal, which included like pandemic leaves. And most of the regions came up with things like that, wellness apps. We in fact are actually April 27th, we are coming up with a health day where we are giving off to employees globally, right? So I think that was the priority. And if you ask me about experiences across, I would say more or less it was the same, though the offices were in a different status, I would say, because of course the stage was different in various locations, but the common threads were the same. The need to collaborate, the human need to be in touch with the other people, I would say was the same across locations.
Excellent. Thanks, Vibha. Moving on to Vijay. Vijay, I know you have very diversity of experience. I mean, and you are also a much smaller company compared to the others in the panel. What are some of the unique things that you have observed, Vijay, in terms of the employee engagement or experiences in the past 1 year?
I would say it's the readiness, right? I mean, for me, this is probably the fourth change I've seen in the globe, starting with the 1990 earthquake and Rodney King's when I was in LA, the middle of the earthquake, having a 4-inch crack through our businesses go through when I was 16 years old, to seeing the whole dot-com bust and the 2008 that we saw. And one thing I recognize in all of this, being through all of these different change, is that it's actually, the game is the same. The only thing that's changed is the playing field.
Yeah.
You know, you end up landing in a new territory and the rain is different, the pitch is different. That's actually what is happening, right? And what we've trained for within our ecosystem is how to play the sport at its best when the times are changing, right?
Sure.
And I think this has been an opportunity actually for great new players to evolve, for them to really shine in a new light overall. So that opportunity has become so visible. And you know, discoveries that we would never have made have expedited. Individuals that you thought were passive have become remarkable leaders that have become very vocal. So you've seen such a plethora of evolution and change expedite through. And I would say as an organization, for us, it's been about calmness. Can we be calm and not add to the anxiety, add to the worry, but really allow our players of the sports team that we're part of, right, which is a great play, and let them become the leaders because they're now on the field playing the game, pitching the bat, right? We as coaches are on the sideline sort of giving the cheer up. So for us, I think it's been about that as a whole overall, right?
Excellent. I think that's a great point, Vijay. We'll come back to that in a minute. Jonathan, your situation is very unique compared to anyone, right? You are remote, right? The entire organization is remote, right? So wow, did you guys even feel anything, or did you have to change anything? So how did you handle the situation?
Yeah. Firstly, thank you, Zanav, for putting together this panel and for having me. I think there's been a lot of change in the last year, and I'd emphasize that by saying, a little more than 10 years ago, we used to call these smartphones. Today, we just call them phones. I think the big shift is remote work. All work will be remote work going forward. All teams will be distributed teams, and sometimes globally distributed teams. And the new normal is teams or distributed teams. Work is going to be remote or a hybrid of remote. And in that new normal, the three things people have to keep in mind, in my experience, both at Turing and what we see in our customers, is number one, communication. Over communicate and have with an emphasis on asynchronous communication. Number two, consistency. I heard Richa and Vibha also talk about creating a level playing field. Making sure that you don't have double standards in your team for who's remote versus who's local. So consistent communication. And the third is building the importance of having a great culture where people feel more connected to each other. I think Vibha mentioned the need to communicate and collaborate, and I think that's more important than ever. So communication, consistency, and culture is what I see as things to double down in this new normal.
Excellent points there, Jonathan. So Vibha, let me come to you on a completely different topic. I think, when you went from this, slightly, a small percentage of the employees being remote to a large percentage of them being remote, and probably like somewhere in between the hybrid workplace evolving, what are some of the major process changes that you have to design, Vibha? And what was the change management? Where were the biggest pain points for you?
Good question. And when I reflect on 2020, I think we were one of the first offices to close in Bay Area, basically, and we did it in one evening. We decided that that's the best thing to do for our employees. So honestly, we were not the best prepared when we took this decision, but it was, in hindsight, it was the best decision at that point of time. So coming to what are the challenges? So I think the closing was the easiest thing to do. The challenges were people did not have heads up to take the equipments back home. I would say that's the thing, right? So initially for us, it was, like I said earlier, employee safety and well-being was important. That's why we took this decision. Second priority for us was to ensure that employees have the equipments with them, so that they can be productive, right? And work from home, because we did envision that this would be a long-term thing and it was not going away in a couple of months. So what we did was when the things became a bit better, we did a drive where employees could come to office and collect whatever equipments they wanted, including their chairs. It was a humongous task to do with 4,000 employees here, but we managed to do that in a very seamless fashion. And I would say the third thing for us was, how do we start building communities, right? What about the benefits policies? So of course, with the community building, we started going virtual. We in fact reimagined our summer party as well, because earlier it was in person and we thought we need to bring people together. So we did a virtual summer party where we asked people to form teams and they could do painting together, or actually even play a virtual reality game together. So those are some of the things we did. Of course, benefits, there were certain state laws which we had to abide by as well. So those changes we did, but mostly in terms of benefits, I would say because we were always in this mode, so the benefits changes were not that much at that point of time, but processes definitely.
Good. Richa, a slightly different question for you. You are in an industry, or even the role before this also is in an industry that is like highly regulated. That means that there is a lot of confidentiality that comes with it, a lot of privacy that comes with it. Are there any specific changes that you need to make at the same time, not to kind of impact the experience of an employee, or how they engage with not only their leaders but also their collaborators, right? So, how did you manage that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and fortunately, it did not come in the way. Right. Okay. So most of our compliance work, the regulatory laws were well understood and employees just abided by those. We have, IT rules and access restrictions in place. So no matter which location the employee sat in or even at home, none of that was impacted. Now we have at Castlight, our call center that is still operational in person, and those are some of the roles where we call them care guides. They're benefits specialists and actual nurses who, based on the business that we do, we are actually in the business of making healthier, happier, and more productive lives in the care navigation. So there's always a lot of calls from users and their families on how do I read my claims data? How can you help me get to the right solution? So all of the protocols on how the care guides are supposed to have those interactions and really share the information are in place. So I wouldn't say COVID really impacted the way we went about our compliance and governance rules.
Okay, so you don't have to change any changes even for like a cross business unit communications or cross team communications, or how do you provide the transparency for the employees or any of them?
Same rules apply. We just went digital.
Okay, perfect. Which is a different question for you. Let's go into a different topic in the interest of time. How, are you using any digital tools now? Because now everybody is at least, remote or going to be remote partially. Are there any tools or technologies that you use that actually made a lot more impact for you than when you are all in the office?
Vamsee, thanks for that, and thanks for the opportunity over here to be here, because it's a topic very dear, right? And I talk about this whole theme around sports and players. And when the playing field changes, what happens? Anxiety levels go up.
Yeah.
What's going to happen to my job? What's going to happen to the customer? I'm not able to be as productive. What's going to occur, right? And we launched one tool, and one very most important tool, and it's the FSAT tool. So far, we've heard about the ESAT, we've heard about the CSAT, right? Customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction. But I think this changing norm, the only way we can measure whether our team had anxiety or not, or whether things were normal or not, or the productivity is happening or not, was to the FSAT score. Family satisfaction. Family satisfaction. Okay. We ran a survey for all family members to vote. Not employees don't have a say. The family members have a say to inform us how the people are doing. Because if an individual is balanced at home, he's calm at home, he's not yelling at the kids saying, I've got work to do, I've got to report on something, then we know they're not going to make the errors. We know they're going to be innovative. We know they're going to think on the behalf of our customers and our clients who are going through this crisis. So I would say that was one of the biggest changes that we made. And we launched a leadership CEO dashboard through which regular surveys would happen. And they would give indications, and all our questions were always pertinent to measuring anxiety levels of a human being, right? So I would say that's one of the tools that we launched, and I think it's been a remarkable success. And the embracement that we've seen people come together with has been unbelievable.
That's a very, very unique thing that we ever heard, Vijay. So thank you so much for sharing with us. Jonathan, same question from a different perspective. When employees are all remote or mostly remote, what are some of the new things you are measuring or monitoring, and how is it valuable?
Great question. So when employees are remote or fully remote, what are the new things that we measure? I would say when you're operating as a remote distributed team, the most important thing is communication and asynchronous communication, and it starts on day one. So when we onboard a new person to a fully distributed team, like at Turing, we have a very detailed onboarding process where we make sure that the person receives organizational context. Okay, here is the company, here are the different teams, here is the person responsible for each team, what metrics they care about, how those teams connect with each other, the org chart, what are the company's priorities quarter by quarter. We write it down and share it. And it's so powerful. Writing things down is just so powerful. And our reason for doing this is we don't want people to be stuck in Slack prisons. Like too often somebody's like on some Slack channel somewhere, they don't know what's happening in other parts of the company. So we over communicate stuff like this. So we make sure people receive organizational context. We make sure that Turing's, like our company's core values are written down and people understand it. And we give somebody a buddy for the first 3 months. We have somebody onboarding. Here are 4 people in the company you should speak with in the first month to fully ramp up.
Got it.
So that onboarding process has to be very detailed. And then you need frequent checkpoints. So we have our OKRs are reviewed weekly and shared publicly company-wide. So periodic follow through on communication. There's one thing my mentor at GitLab taught me, which was whenever somebody asks a question, the answer should be a link versus somebody answering it, which means you've written it down, right? The first time it can be a verbal response, but then you write it down, there's a link that's documented. So it kind of holds up over time. I would say in addition to the tools, and I loved Vijay's FSAT tool, I think we should try that at Turing. In addition to tools, I would say it's the way you use the tools, like it's quick feedback loops, consistent follow-up. And I encourage all my teams to have in-person meetings where it's safe to do so. So remote does not mean you never meet and you're always in Zoom. So in some of our teams occasionally have walking meetings, socially distanced, if they feel comfortable doing that. So I think those are very important. If I had to pick one thing, it would be relying on asynchronous communication for decision making and meetings, and minimizing in-person meetings as much as possible.
That's great segue to the next topic that Vibha, I'm going to come ask you is, one thing is about the communication. At the end of the day, it is about the leadership and the change management, right? So how important it is for the leaders to plan and manage and monitor and proactively communicate and all that stuff. I mean, like, we have heard bits and pieces of it, but from your perspective, what are some of the unique things or best practices that companies should adopt?
I would say communication is the key to any successful change management, right? So communication is definitely important, but we have a big opportunity in front of us, and that is to do something for the long term and prepare the organization for future. I think that's how the leaders should look at it. It should be a more long-term approach. And coming to communication, of course, like I said, it's important. It's important to be not just communicate, but communicate truthfully. to be transparent to the employees and set the right expectations as to what works for their organization and what does not work for them. Because every team has different nuances, and we know, though we are talking about hybrid model, remote work, not all the teams would be remote, right? Because there are certain roles which need to be in office. So how can you be inclusive to them? I think those are some of the questions that leaders should ask, and build a culture which is based on, I would say, transparency and trust, because I think that will help the teams be successful in future. And I also feel that each team, to be successful in the hybrid model, needs to come with their own set of best practices, which may include having their own guidelines, coming to office, having collaboration mediums that can include coming to office, say, 2 days in a week where the entire team is together, just for collaboration purposes, have set rules around the meetings, how they give updates, and how they even recognize each other, right? Because if you want collaboration and unity, those are some of the important things. And the last, I would say, for me, what is extremely important is to have a psychological safety in the team, right? A safe space for people to provide their opinions and help each other and build on each other's ideas.
Excellent, excellent. In the interest of time, Richa, I'm going to ask you a completely different question. It's about remoteness and lack of empathy. Right. I mean, like, at least perceived lack of empathy. How do you handle those things? I mean, like, when everybody is in the same room, you meet them, see them all the time itself, people think that there is lack of empathy in the organization. And when you are always remote or mostly remote, that's that's a big challenge. So how are you handling that?
Absolutely. And I think we think it needs to be different, or the approach needs to be different when you're remote versus person, but it's actually not. I think this time last year really showed us how fundamental and simple the art of leadership is and should be, right? So whether you are in person with somebody in the room or on the phone, intentionally asking the question of, how are you doing? Now, how different is it from being in person versus over the phone, as long as you really mean it, right? So one concept that I've really learned and taught my managers is the concept of wise compassion, right? The economy went through some complex changes. The transformation is still on. We don't have a day to skip the beat, right? Or take a rest from this thing. So we have to keep the work going. In addition to that, we have to keep the people going. So how do you get tough things done in a human way is the concept of wise compassion. So just, be human, still give the feedback, the constructive feedback that you need to give your people, but actually be truly, mindfully, authentically be invested in their holistic well-being is the key to it. And it doesn't matter. Remote does not play a role into it. I mean, you can be on the phone and still have the same level of empathy as you would in the room.
So how do you inculcate that across your organization, Richa? I know some people are natural. Some people need mentoring. Some leaders are, just need to be taught. So how do you enable that?
Absolutely. I mean, training does play a big role into it, but I was having a manager connection circle at Castlight a few weeks ago, and some managers told me that, we weren't ready for it, but the time really forced it on us and we didn't have a choice. So we didn't leave with a choice. And as Vibha was saying, who had the time to prepare anybody to deal with anything, right? A lot of us had to really jump in and learn it as we went. And we did great. If you look back, most of us did great, and it kind of speaks to the resilience. But then there are, of course, programmatic tools. We have done a lot of training. We have opened a lot of forums for open conversations so the managers can come in and learn from each other, and then they learn through their own experiences and shared back. So we have put a lot of kind of programs in place, but I think this thing also happened very organically, where we were all thrown into it and had to learn to swim, and how to be empathetic and how to also be great managers and keep the growth going.
Excellent, excellent. There is a couple of questions I want to ask, but before that, there are a couple of questions from the audience. I thought one of them, both of them are interesting, but one of them is really, really, I'm also curious about it. I think this is a question actually for you, Vijay, from Nivedita, asking, this is a great initiative, brilliant. Can you share some of the metrics that you measure for the FSAT?
So, it's a wonderful question, right? So work hours, right? How much are people working? Number one. Number two,
Okay.
we look at how much are people celebrating. I think it's been one of our themes inside the organization, but outside.
Mhm.
If people are celebrating, it's a very strong indication of a person's state of mind, right?
Sure.
And one of our themes across the span of years has been no surprises, celebrate success, right?
Sure.
And what is the first thing that happens when a pandemic happens? Something people stop celebrating. We start saying, well, it's not the time to celebrate. And if you stop celebrating, then life is not a joy. You're not playing the field. You're not playing the game, right? So, are those small moments and occasions still being celebrated? And I think we focused on many of these factors, but I would say we focused, if you were to say, of all the metrics that we were running around, celebration was one of the ones we looked at. The anniversaries, the birthdays, the small events, people are going through educational challenges, right? Being together, the amount of notes that we continue to get around this time that, for the first time in years, I'm celebrating my birthday with my mother, right? Because a lot of people are working, have moved away, and other things that people have moved back to the workplaces. So I would say, when we look at it, we look at the human elements of a person and a being as a whole overall, right? And celebration, I would say, was one of our biggest measures of takeaways.
Absolutely. We will remember that, Vijay, and we should, I think, people always talk that, hey, it's been a busy year, we need to take a break, but somehow we never take that very seriously. So that's great to know that you're actually measuring it. So
life is a joy and every moment is worth living, right? So
exactly. So there is one other question from Robert who's asking, like, how do you hire in a remote world? What are the most effective strategies? So I don't know who wants to take that. Jonathan, let's go with you.
Yeah. So I think we are living in an incredible time where it's now normal to look to hire the best people in the world, not the best people who happen to live near our office, right?
Okay.
And if you're hiring in a remote first world, I would say it's important to look in countries and geographies where there is high quality talent, but not enough local opportunity. And there are many, like for example, for engineering, we find incredibly amazing engineers in Eastern Europe, Central Europe, South America, Southeast Asia, parts of Africa. Africa is becoming huge for engineering talent. So there's great people all over the world. You just need to have a data-driven process where you can evaluate a really large top of the funnel. The challenge with hiring remotely is you won't recognize the schools. If you're hiring a great engineer from Sao Paulo, Brazil, you may not see Stanford, Berkeley on their resume. You won't see Google, Facebook, Stripe in their work experience. But these are incredibly great people. So you can't filter by resume or a LinkedIn profile. You have to assess through lightweight technical tests or screening that you can do, which creates a level playing field. Actually, we find testing to be very fair in terms of elimination of bias. Like, we don't care what people look like or sound like. We just care whether they can do the job. So creating lightweight tests that can be done asynchronously, like say 5-hour tests, 10-hour tests, that really helps. And you also have to make sure there is adequate time zone overlap. So look in geographies where there's at least, we find 4 hours of overlap to be sufficient. And if your organization has gone fully async, you might even get away with no time zones because everything is documented.
Thank you, Jonathan. So a couple of very quick comments, if you can make, Vibha. How do you build and nurture organization culture? What are the things that you have done? I mean, apart from some of the best practices that you have shared, are there anything that you do specifically to kind of focus on organization culture?
Yeah, of course. And I think the organization culture is basically built on the behaviors that you want the people in the organization to follow. So we do have organizational behaviors defined, and that is something we talk at every opportunity. Our reward system is related to that. And also, for example, we do have our employee survey. So as we were hearing about the various surveys, right? So we do have an employee survey where the manager gets a trust score. which is actually defined by one question. So it's a pretty tough job to get a good score on that. And also that is where we check on these behaviors, whether they are being followed by the leaders themselves, first of all, right? Because the leaders have to live it to show it for the teams to follow. So through that mechanism also, we try to build the behaviors, and which in turn helps us build a culture for the organization. And it also ties with the vision, right? Like giving back to society, which is very big for SAP. And I think any person you speak to SAP, it would just run in the DNA because that's the vision and the purpose as well.
Excellent. Thanks. One last question to you, Richa. I mean, like, when everybody is remote, nobody, many of them are not going to meet each other, but they are going to collaborate, they are going to work together. In those cases, how do you ensure that there is a healthy communication between the teams and individuals?
Absolutely. And what came to our rescue, Vamsee, was the concept of community. And that, in a way, answers the question that you were asking, Vibha, around how you keep the culture alive, is through the community. So what we did was, again, digitally connecting people on common causes, be it volunteering or team project, and last year, in the second half of last year, we actually, in the entirely virtual world, took an opportunity to refresh our values. Times are changing. Values were set 2 years ago. What needs to be different? And we pulled the employees in to reshape what the values needed to look like. A lot of virtual communities, again, purpose-based communities around company projects, etc. And Castlight, given the place where we are, we organically had the opportunities to contribute more broadly to the COVID time. So a lot of kind of purpose-driven work around designing test site finders, and now we are working with CDC on vaccine finders, right? So there's, naturally there's a lot of work that is broadly socially meaningful. So aligning employees to the purpose of the company, constantly communicating with, what that needs to look like and how our day-to-day work aligns with the bigger cause and purpose here. The community-based communication, all digitally, communication has been really important. So we went from a monthly all hands to every other week all hands, where our CEO shows up. There's no miss, right? And the leadership team communicating, updating, the SharePoints, the newsletters, the blogs, the emails, the Slacks, firing on all channels, and it works. So I think this time, if anything else, has busted the myth that we need to see each other every single day to be effective, to be communicative. So the virtual communities really have come to our rescue.
No, thank you, everyone. I know Richa, Vibha, Vijay, and Jonathan can't ask you for a better panel to discuss these things. And thank you for sharing all your point of views, and more importantly, your experiences and your guidance. Right. So I know there's years and years worth of guidance that you can give, and through your experience. It's just that we absolutely ran out of time. So we are going to, again, thank you so much. We'll end the panel discussion here. Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yes,
thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.